My husband of 30 years folded his hands in front of him and told me he was leaving. "I've been unhappy for a long time," he said. "There's someone else." I want you to picture a Tuesday evening in October. The kind of Tuesday that smells like candles and leftover Sunday pot roast. The kind of evening where the light comes through the kitchen window at just the right angle and turns everything gold. That was the evening Walter Tatum decided to tell me he wanted a divorce. Not a fight. Not a blow-up. Not the kind of thing that comes after years of screaming and slamming doors. We weren't that kind of couple. We had never been that kind of couple. In 30 years of marriage, we had our disagreements. Lord knows we did, but we talked through them. We sat across from each other at that same kitchen table and we worked things out like adults, like partners, like two people who had chosen each other on purpose. That was what I believed. I was standing at the sink, rinsing the dinner dishes when I heard him pull out the chair behind me. The sound of it, wood scraping against the tile, was so ordinary, so completely, painfully ordinary. I didn't even turn around. I just kept rinsing, watching the water run warm over the plates, thinking about whether I needed to call Marcus back that night or if it could wait until morning. "Evelyn," he said, "just my name, nothing else." But something in the way he said it made me turn off the faucet. I dried my hands on the dish towel, turned around slowly. Walter was sitting at the table with both hands folded in front of him, and he had the look of a man who had rehearsed something. I know that look. After 30 years, you know every look a person has. You know the difference between the face he makes when he's thinking and the face he makes when he's already decided. He had already decided. "Sit down," he said. I didn't sit. I stayed where I was, my back against the sink, the dish towel still in my hands. Something in my stomach had gone very still and very cold. And some part of me, the part that had survived everything, the part that my mother, Mama Ruth, had put iron into, already knew. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I said nothing. I just looked at him. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at me with those eyes I had known for 33 years, dated for 3, married for 30, and he said it. "I want a divorce, Evelyn. I've been unhappy for a long time. I've tried to make it work. I've tried to find my way back to where we were. But I can't keep pretending. I think it's better for both of us if we go our separate ways." I heard every word. I stood there and I let every word land. And then I heard the part he hadn't said yet. The part that was sitting right behind those carefully rehearsed sentences, waiting to come out. I could feel it the way you feel a storm before the sky changes. "Is there someone else?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. And in that pause, in that 3-second silence, 30 years of my life rearranged itself into a shape I did not recognize. "There's someone I've been spending time with," he said. "Yes." I set the dish towel down on the counter. I set it down very carefully. I smoothed it flat. I don't know why. My hands just needed something to do while my mind tried to catch up to what my ears had just heard. "How old is she?" I asked. Another pause. "Evelyn." "How old?" "Walter." He looked at his hands. 34. 34. I was 62 years old. I had been married to this man since I was 32. I had given this man 30 years. 3 decades of my life, my money, my career sacrifices, my body, my prayers, my best years. And he was sitting at our kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday in October telling me he wanted someone 34 years old, someone younger than our own daughter. I did not cry. I want you to understand that. I did not cry right then, not because I wasn't broken. I was. Something inside me split open so wide that I could feel the air moving through the crack. But I had been raised by a woman who cried in private, who bled in private, who only let the world see her standing. And even in that moment, maybe especially in that moment, Mama Ruth's voice came to me clear as water. "Baby, never let them see you fall apart. Fall apart on your own time. Stand up right now." So I stood up. "I see," I said. That was all I said. Walter blinked. He had been expecting something. Screaming. Maybe. Begging. Tears. He had braced himself for something, and I gave him nothing but those 2 quiet words and the sound of my house shoes on the kitchen tile as I walked to our bedroom, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. And there, in the dark, where no one could see me, I let myself feel it. I pressed my hand over my mouth so he wouldn't hear, and I shook. I shook from somewhere so deep inside that I couldn't find the bottom of it. I shook for the marriage I thought I had. I shook for the man I thought I knew. I shook for every morning I had made his coffee the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, for 30 years. I shook for the vacations we'd never taken because the business always needed something. I shook for the babies I had carried and delivered and raised and launched into the world. I shook for 30 years of Tuesday evenings and Sunday pot roasts and the particular gold light through the kitchen window that I would never be able to look at the same way again. And when the shaking stopped, I sat very still for a long time. And then I did something Walter would never have expected. I picked up my phone and I called my sister Carolyn. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand what 30 years looks like. Not 30 years in a magazine. Not 30 years in a movie where the woman is beautiful and the husband is handsome and love is simple and clean and fits inside a 2-hour runtime. I mean, 30 real years. 30 years made out of the actual fabric of a life. The hard years and the lean years and the years when you couldn't remember the last time you laughed until your sides hurt, but you kept going anyway because you had made a vow and your mother had raised you to honor your word. I met Walter Tatum in the fall of 1989 at a church picnic in Stone Mountain, Georgia. I was 29 years old and I was already a school teacher. 6th grade English at Carver Elementary. And I was the kind of woman who had her life in order. I paid my own rent. I drove my own car. I had a savings account and a 5-year plan and a very clear picture of what I wanted my future to look like. Walter was tall, handsome in that quiet, solid way. Not flashy, not performing, just present. He had just started his own small contracting company with his friend Gerald, doing residential renovations out of a truck and a toolbox and a whole lot of nerve. He didn't have much, but he had ambition, and he had manners, and the first time he spoke to me, he looked me directly in the eyes like I was worth looking at. We dated for 3 years. I was cautious. Mama Ruth had raised me to be cautious. You don't give yourself away, she told me. You make sure a man shows you who he is before you let him into the center of your life. Walter showed me. Or I thought he did. We married in 1992. Small ceremony, Trinity Baptist, 40 guests, Mama Ruth in the front row crying happy tears in a lavender dress she'd bought 6 months in advance. I wore my grandmother's pearls. Walter cried at the altar. He cried. I had never seen him cry before that day, and it undid me completely. I thought, this is a man who is not afraid to feel things. This is a man I can trust. The early years were tight. We were building. Walter's business was growing slowly. He had contracts here and there, small jobs, nothing steady yet. I was the steady one. My teacher's salary paid the mortgage on our first house, a little brick ranch in Decatur that we bought for $87,000 and that I put my name on alongside his. My salary bought the groceries and kept the lights on while he poured everything he made back into the business. I did not complain. I want you to hear me say that. I did not complain because I believed in him. I believed in what we were building. I told myself, we are planting now so we can harvest later. This is what partnership looks like. This is what love does. When Mama Ruth passed in 1997, she left me $40,000, her life savings, everything she had. She had worked as a nurse for 35 years and pinched every penny and left it all to me with a handwritten note that said, for your future, baby, whatever you need it for, what I needed it for at that moment was Walter's business. He had an opportunity, a commercial contract that could take the company to the next level, a school renovation project in Fulton County. But he needed capital he didn't have, equipment, insurance upgrades, bonding requirements. I gave him the $40,000, every penny of it. Every penny my mother had saved across 35 years of 12-hour nursing shifts and skipped vacations and hand-me-down shoes. I gave it to my husband because he was my partner and I believed in what we were building. That contract changed everything. Tatum Construction landed 3 more commercial projects in the next 2 years. By 2002, the company had 8 employees. By 2005, 22. By 2010, Walter was running a $4 million annual operation, and we had moved out of the Decatur ranch and into a 4-bedroom colonial in Lithonia with a 2-car garage and a yard big enough for the grandchildren we didn't have yet. By 2015, the business was worth, on paper, somewhere north of $8 million. And all of it, every brick of it, had been built on a foundation that included my salary, my mother's money, my name, my belief, my sacrifice. I retired from education in 2018 after 30 years of teaching and 15 years as a principal. I had loved that work. I had loved those children. But I had given Walter everything I had, and by the time I retired, I had a smaller pension than I should have had because there had been years where I'd taken breaks, where I'd stepped back, where the family and the business had needed me more than my career had. I did not complain about that either. I thought we were in it together. By the time Walter sat down at that kitchen table on that Tuesday evening in October, our children were grown. Marcus was 38, living in Charlotte, working in finance, married with 2 boys. Simone was 35, right here in Atlanta, a nurse like her grandmother, with a daughter named Imani, who called me Grandma Evie and made my heart feel like a warm biscuit every time she walked through the door. We had grandchildren. We had a paid-off house. We had a business that was doing better than ever. And my husband wanted out. He wanted out to be with a 34-year-old woman who was young enough to be Simone's little sister. Young enough, in fact, to have been in 6th grade when Walter and I were exchanging vows at Trinity Baptist Church. When Carolyn answered the phone that night, I could barely get the words out. "He's leaving me," I said. There was a silence on the line. The kind of silence that happens between sisters when something is so bad that language almost can't reach it. "For who?" she said. I told her. Another silence. "How old?" she said. I told her. I heard her exhale slowly. Then I heard her voice shift into that register, the one she only uses when things are serious. The one Mama Ruth had given both of us. Quiet, clear, like water that has gone very still right before a storm. "Evelyn," she said, "don't do anything yet. Don't sign anything. Don't say anything. Just sit right there and let me call you back in the morning. Carolyn. I'm calling Patricia Winslow first thing tomorrow. You hear me? Don't touch a thing in that house." Patricia Winslow was Carolyn's college roommate. She was also one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the state of Georgia. I didn't know it then, but that phone call, that one decision to call my sister instead of falling apart alone, was the beginning of the end of Walter's plan. I spent that night in the guest room. Not because Walter asked me to. I moved myself. I took my pillow and my phone charger and my grandmother's Bible, and I closed the guest room door behind me, and I lay in the dark, and I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I prayed. And then I planned. The next morning, Carolyn called at 7:15. She had already spoken to Patricia Winslow. Patricia had agreed to meet with me at 10 o'clock. Carolyn would drive me. Walter was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He looked like a man who had not slept, which satisfied some small, hard part of me. He opened his mouth to say something, and I raised one hand. "I'm not ready to talk," I said. "Don't speak to me about this until I'm ready." He closed his mouth. I poured my coffee, and I went back upstairs, and I started looking. This is the thing about 30 years of marriage. You know where everything is. You know every account, every file, every password. You know which drawer the spare keys go in and which shelf holds the tax returns and which email address he uses for what. You know these things because you have lived inside the same life for 3 decades, and information seeps into you the way rain seeps into the ground, without trying, without thinking. I opened his email on his laptop, the old password he'd been using since 2019, the one he'd never bothered to change, and I started reading. I am not a woman who goes looking for trouble. But trouble had already come to find me. And now I was going to know exactly what I was dealing with. Her name was Denise Brooks. She was 34 years old, as he'd said. She worked in the office at Tatum Construction, had been working there for 2 years. She handled client communications and project billing. She had a desk 20 feet from my husband's office door. She had been sleeping with my husband for 14 months. 14 months. I sat with that number for a long time. 14 months. I thought about the last 14 months of my life. I thought about Thanksgiving. Had he been with her on Thanksgiving? I thought about our anniversary in the spring, when he'd taken me to that restaurant downtown and ordered the good wine and held my hand across the table. Was he with her then? Was he thinking about her then? I kept reading. What I found was worse than I had expected, and I had expected bad. In the emails, in the texts I found when I picked up his secondary phone, the one he kept in his truck that he thought I didn't know about, I found the full shape of it. Not just an affair, a plan. They had been talking about the future, about what the future looked like after me. Denise, it seemed, was not just young and pretty. She was also strategic. There were emails, casual in tone, but precise in content. where she asked him questions about the business, about assets, about what he owned and what it was worth, about the house, about whether my name was on things. There was a text from 4 months ago where she had written, "How much would she get in a divorce?" And Walter had written back, "Working on minimizing that. Working on minimizing that." I put the phone down on the nightstand. I put it down the way you put something down when you are afraid of what you might do if you keep holding it. And I sat very still for a long moment, breathing through my nose, letting my heartbeat slow back down to something even. Then I picked up my own phone and texted Carolyn, "I'm ready. Come get me." Patricia Winslow's office was on Peachtree Street in a building with real marble floors and an elevator that opened directly into the suite. She was a compact woman in her early 60s with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain, and the precise, unhurried way of speaking that told you she had spent decades in courtrooms and had never once been rattled. She looked at me across her desk and said, "Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." So I did. I told her about the marriage, about the early years and my salary and Mama Ruth's $40,000 and the Fulton County contract and the growth of the business. I told her about my name being on the original property and on certain business documents during the early years. I told her about the text messages I had found, including the one about minimizing what I would receive. Patricia listened without interrupting. She took notes in a small leather notebook with a silver pen. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, reviewing what she'd written. "Evelyn," she said, "do you know what an equitable distribution state is?" "I teach English, not law," I said. "Explain it to me." She smiled for just a moment. "Georgia is an equitable distribution state. That means marital assets, assets acquired during the marriage, are divided fairly between spouses in a divorce, not always equally, but fairly. And the court considers many factors." She tapped her pen on the notebook, "including financial contributions to the marriage, including non-financial contributions, including one spouse's sacrifice of career advancement to support the other's career or business." I looked at her. "Including," she continued, "the dissipation of marital assets, which is what we call it when a spouse uses marital money to fund an affair." I thought about Danice's desk in that office, the office funded by my mother's money. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. Patricia set down her pen. "It means if we document everything correctly, your financial contributions, your mother's inheritance, your career sacrifices, the business growth timeline, the expenses related to the affair, it means Walter's plan to minimize your share is not going to work the way he thinks it is." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, is your name on the house?" "Yes," I said, "both our names." "The business?" "I was on the original incorporation documents. I don't know about the current structure." "We'll find out," she said. "And the retirement accounts? The investment accounts?" I gave her everything I knew. Every account, every number, every asset I could recall. And with every answer I gave her, I watched something shift in Patricia Winslow's expression. Not surprise. She had seen too much to be surprised. But a kind of quiet, professional satisfaction. "Evelyn," she said when we were done, "I want you to go home. I want you to photograph every document in that house. Tax returns, bank statements, business records, everything. I want you to write down every financial contribution you can remember making to this marriage, with dates if you have them. And I want you to say nothing to Walter about this meeting." I asked her, "Is he going to walk away with everything?" She looked at me with those reading glasses on that chain and she said, "Not if I have anything to do with it." For the first time since Tuesday night, I felt something other than grief move through me. It felt like purpose. I drove home from Patricia's office a different woman than the one who had left it 2 hours before. That is the only way I know to describe it. Something had reorganized inside me during that meeting. Something had clicked into its proper place. The grief was still there. I won't pretend it wasn't. It sat in my chest like a stone, and I knew it was going to be there for a long time. Grief for a marriage doesn't clear out in an afternoon. It camps down inside you and works its way through you slowly, and there's no shortcut around it. But grief and purpose can occupy the same body. I know that now. Mama Ruth knew it all her life. She grieved my father for 20 years after he left. Grieved him quietly and privately, and never once let it stop her from doing what needed to be done. She would have recognized exactly what was happening inside me on that drive home, and she would have nodded and said, "That's right, baby. Now you're thinking." Walter was at the office when I got home. Of course he was. He spent 12 hours a day at that office now. I understood the reason for that differently than I had 24 hours ago. I had 3 hours. I went through that house the way Mama Ruth used to clean for Easter Sunday. Thorough, methodical, leaving nothing unturned. I photographed every document I could find. Tax returns for the past 7 years. Bank statements. Business financial statements. His personal investment account statements. The one he managed separately that he thought I paid no attention to. The home equity line of credit documents. The insurance policies. The deed to the house. The deed to the small commercial property downtown that the business used as a secondary storage facility. A property I had not known about until I found the paperwork in the back of the filing cabinet. A property worth, according to the tax assessment document stapled to the deed, $340,000. A property I had never been told existed. I photographed everything. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and I did what Patricia had asked. I wrote down every financial contribution I could document. My teacher's salary that had paid the mortgage from 1992 to 2000 while he poured his income back into the business. The $40,000 from Mama Ruth. The years I had paid for the children's school clothes, school supplies, medical bills, and extracurricular activities without asking him to contribute because money was tight and I didn't want to add pressure. The years I had handled all household expenses so he could focus on growing the company. I wrote for 2 hours. When I finished, the legal pad was 6 pages full. I called Patricia and told her about the commercial property downtown. I heard the scratch of her silver pen on paper. "He didn't mention it?" she said. "He never told me it existed," I said. A pause. "Evelyn, that is a marital asset. Purchased during the marriage, I assume?" "The deed says 2011, I said. "With marital funds?" "I would imagine so. We didn't have separate accounts." Another pause. Then, "Good. Very good. I'm going to request a full financial disclosure in the initial filing. Everything comes out in discovery. Everything. He won't be able to hide a paperclip." That evening, Walter came home. He moved around the kitchen with the careful, apologetic energy of a man who doesn't know what's about to happen to him. He asked if I wanted him to order dinner. I said no. I cooked. I cooked because cooking gave me something to do with my hands and because this was still my kitchen, still my stove, still my house, and I was not about to stop living my life in it because Walter Tatum had lost his mind. We ate mostly in silence. Afterward, he tried again. He sat across from me and he said, carefully, that he wanted to talk about how to handle things. He said he wanted things to be civil. He said he didn't want to drag this out. I looked at him. "I've spoken to an attorney," I said. Something moved across his face. A flicker. "Oh," he said. "All right. I understand. I have one too." "Good," I said. "Then they can talk." He nodded slowly. He seemed to be waiting for something else from me. Emotion, maybe. Or negotiation. Or some sign that I was going to fight him or beg him or give him an opening to offer me the smallest possible settlement and walk away. I gave him nothing. I stood up, washed my dishes, and went to the guest room. The next morning, I called Marcus. That was the hardest call I made in all of this. Marcus had worshipped his father since he was small. He had followed Walter around job sites with a toy hammer. He had gone to work for the business for 2 summers in college. He had his father's hands, his father's jaw, his father's way of going quiet when something difficult needed thinking through. Telling him felt like breaking something I would never be able to fully repair. I told him everything, plainly, without performance. I had learned from Mama Ruth that children deserve the truth, even when the truth is hard, and they deserve it without you using them as an audience for your grief. Marcus listened. The silence on the line afterward lasted a full minute. "The woman," he said finally. "She works for him?" "She does," I said. Another silence. "Mama," he said. His voice had changed. Something in it had gone very quiet and very old. "Mama, I need you to listen to me. Don't settle. Whatever he offers you first, don't take it. You hear me? You built that company. You built that house. You're not leaving with less than what you're owed." I don't know why, but hearing my son say that made the stone in my chest shift just slightly. Not dissolve. Just move. "I know," I said. "Do you have a good lawyer?" "Patricia Winslow." A pause. Then a low sound. Almost a laugh, but darker. "Good. He's going to regret this." 3 days after I called Marcus, Simone showed up at my front door with a week's worth of groceries, a box of Mama Ruth's old recipes, and tears running down her face that she kept angrily wiping away. "I'm not crying," she kept saying, clearly crying. I'm furious. I'm absolutely furious." She stayed for 5 days. She cooked with me and watched movies with me in the evenings and slept in the guest room beside me and didn't once tell me what to feel or how to feel it. She just stayed, the way Mama Ruth would have stayed, the way women in this family have always stayed for each other when things fall apart. Walter stayed mostly at the office. He came home late and left early. The house was mine in all the ways that mattered. I used the time. Patricia Winslow filed the divorce petition 4 weeks after our first meeting. Walter's attorney, a man named Howard Briggs, who had a reputation for aggressive asset protection on behalf of business owner husbands, called Patricia the day after the filing and offered what he called a reasonable starting point. He offered me the house and 18 months of spousal support. That was it. House and 18 months. For 30 years of marriage and $40,000 of my dead mother's money and 3 decades of my life. Patricia called me after the call. "What did you say?" I asked. "I laughed," she said, and then I told him we'd see him in discovery. Discovery is a legal process where both sides have to disclose their full financial picture. Everything, every account, every asset, every transaction. Howard Briggs had clearly advised Walter to make a quick offer before that process began, before everything came to light, too late. What came to light in discovery was a full accounting of 30 years. And it told a story that Walter had apparently hoped would stay hidden. The business. Tatum Construction had, at its peak, been valued at approximately $8.4 million. Walter's attorney tried to argue that the business was entirely his, that I had no ownership interest, that my early financial contributions were simply spousal support and not business investment. Patricia countered with documentation. My salary records from those early years. Bank records showing deposits into the joint account that was used to cover the mortgage while Walter's income went to the business. A paper trail showing the transfer of Mama Ruth's $40,000 into the account from which the Fulton County contract bonding fees had been paid. She also called in a forensic accountant. That accountant's report took 3 weeks to complete and was 42 pages long. What it found was this. Over the course of 14 months, the duration of the affair, Walter had made a series of cash withdrawals and transfers that Patricia's accountant categorized as the dissipation of marital assets. The total was not small. Over $87,000 had moved from business accounts and joint accounts into expenditures that could be traced, when traced carefully enough, to Danice Brooks. A car. A trip to Cancun that had appeared on his calendar as a business development conference. Furniture. Jewelry. A security deposit and first month's rent on a very nice apartment in Buckhead. He had used our money to set her up. He had used the money we had built together to build someone else a life. I remember sitting in Patricia's office when she walked me through the report page by page. I remember my hands being very steady on the conference table while she turned each page. I remember thinking about Mama Ruth in that nursing uniform, working double shifts, clipping coupons, going 30 years without a vacation so she could leave me something. And then I thought about Walter handing that something, in spirit if not in literal fact, to a 34-year-old woman at a desk in his office. I did not say anything for a long moment after Patricia finished. Then I said, "What does this mean?" Patricia took off her reading glasses and set them on the table. "It means," she said, "that Howard Briggs's opening offer was an insult, and it means we are now in a position to counter very differently." She outlined what she believed a court would award given the evidence. The house. Outright, Walter would sign over his interest. 50% of the business valuation as of the date of filing. The commercial property, downtown, or its cash equivalent. Back recovery of the dissipated assets. The $87,000. Permanent spousal support given the length of the marriage and the disparity in current income between us and my reduced pension from taking career breaks. The total, when she put numbers to it, was not a number I had expected to hear. It was more than I had allowed myself to hope for. "He's going to fight this," I said. "He's going to try," Patricia said. "But Howard Briggs is good. He's not a miracle worker, and the evidence is what the evidence is." There was a mediation session in January. Neutral ground. A conference room at a law firm in Midtown with a mediator named Dr. Elaine Forsyth, a calm woman in her 70s who had the serene, slightly removed quality of someone who has watched too many marriages dissolve to be shocked by any of it anymore. Walter came in with Howard Briggs and 2 paralegals. He looked older than the last time I had really looked at him. Tired. Something about his jaw was set in a way I recognized. The way he looked when he was worried but didn't want anyone to know it. I came in with Patricia and Carolyn, who sat beside me and said nothing, and touched my hand exactly once, briefly, when I sat down. I had not been alone in a room with Walter for 3 months. I looked at him. He looked at me. And for just a moment, just one moment, something passed between us that I couldn't name. Some wordless accounting of everything we had been to each other. 30 years of Tuesday evenings and Sunday pot roasts and candles and the gold light through the kitchen window. 30 years of building something together from nothing. 30 years of choosing each other, or thinking we were. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then I looked at Patricia. "Let's begin," she said. Mediation lasted 6 hours. Howard Briggs spent the first 2 of those hours arguing that my financial contributions to the early marriage were not distinguishable from ordinary spousal support, that my name on the incorporation documents was a formality with no legal weight, and that a 50% business valuation claim was wildly overreaching. Patricia let him talk. She had a quality I deeply admired, the ability to let someone exhaust themselves while she conserved her energy. When he finished, she opened her folder and began to present the documentation. Methodically, page by page. My salary records, the bank transfers, the $40,000 and exactly where it had gone, the business growth timeline with annotations, the forensic accountant's report, the dissipation analysis. I watched Walter's face as each document went on the table. I had known this man for 33 years. I had read his face like a text I had taught 100 times. And what I read now, as Patricia turned each page, was not the anger I might have expected or the defiance. What I read was something that looked, underneath the surface, a great deal like shame. He hadn't expected the forensic accountant. He hadn't expected the $87,000 to be traced so carefully. He hadn't expected 42 pages. Howard Briggs called 2 breaks during the session. I understood that he was using those breaks to recalibrate, to go back to Walter in a private room and tell him that the picture was not as favorable as he had perhaps been led to believe. I could see the recalibration happening in Walter's expression each time he came back to the table. The settlement he had thought he was negotiating was not the settlement that was available to him. At hour 5, Briggs made a new offer. The house. 40% of the business valuation. The commercial property, 12 months of back recovery on the dissipation, spousal support for 5 years. Patricia didn't look at me. She was very still for a moment. Then she said, quietly, "The business percentage is 47. The spousal support is permanent given the length of the marriage. Everything else we can discuss." Another break. They came back. 46%. Permanent spousal support at a rate we were able to agree on within 20 minutes. Commercial property in full. Full back recovery of dissipated assets. Walter to sign over his interest in the marital home within 60 days. Patricia looked at me. I looked at the number she had written on her notepad and slid across to me. I thought about Mama Ruth. I thought about the nursing shifts and the coupons and the handwritten note. "For your future, baby." I picked up the pen. I signed. The mediation session ended. Walter stood up across the table, and for a moment I thought he might say something. Something human. Something that acknowledged the 30 years, the life, the weight of what had been undone. He didn't. He put on his coat, and he walked out with Howard Briggs and the 2 paralegals. I sat at that conference table for a moment after he left. Patricia was gathering her files. Carolyn's hand was on my shoulder. "You all right?" Carolyn said. "Yes," I said. And I meant it. I'm all right. 3 weeks after the mediation, I got a phone call from Marcus. He was not calling with news. He was calling with something he'd seen. Something that had happened at Walter's office, Christmas party. The details of which had reached him through Gerald, Walter's old business partner, who had remained friendly with our family throughout all of this. Gerald told Marcus that Danice Brooks had resigned from Tatum Construction in November. The same month, the divorce filing became public. She had left without notice, left her desk one Thursday afternoon and never came back. And 2 weeks after that, 2 weeks before the Christmas party, Walter had found out that she was, in fact, not single. She had a long-term boyfriend, had had one the entire time. A man she'd been with for 5 years, who lived in Marietta, who apparently knew nothing about any of this and was, by Gerald's account, a very large and very unhappy person when he found out. I don't take pleasure in other people's pain. I want you to know that. Mama Ruth raised me right, and I am not a woman who dances on anyone's misfortune. But I would be lying if I said I felt nothing when Marcus told me that. What I felt was something complicated, a mixture of sadness and vindication, and a kind of exhausted understanding that this is how these things so often go. Walter had blown up 30 years for a fantasy. And the fantasy, as fantasies usually do, had turned out not to be what he thought it was. He called me in late January. I was in the sunroom, which was mine now. The whole house was mine now. The locksmith had already been. And my phone rang and his name came up on the screen and I sat there for a moment looking at it. I picked up. "Evelyn," he said. "Walter." A long pause, the kind of pause that has 30 years in it. "I made a mistake," he said. "I know that doesn't." He stopped, started again. "I made the worst mistake of my life. And I know I don't have any right to say this to you. But I needed you to know that I know it." I was quiet for a moment. "Walter," I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I genuinely do. But I need you to understand something." I paused, choosing my words the way you choose them when they matter. "You didn't make a mistake. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. You made a choice. You made it for 14 months. You made it with our money. You made it in our marriage." I paused again. "I needed you to know that I know the difference." He didn't say anything for a long moment. "Evelyn," he said finally. His voice had gone rough at the edges. "Do you think?" "No," I said, gently, but clearly. "No, Walter. There's no path back from this. Not for us. But I genuinely hope, that you figure out what you were actually looking for. Because I don't think it was Danny's. He made a sound that might have been a word. Might have been just sound. Take care of yourself," I said, and I ended the call. I sat in the sunroom for a while after that, with the January light coming through the windows, thin and pale and different from October's gold. I thought about the 30 years again. I thought about what had been real in them and what had been performance and where those two things overlapped. I thought about the man who had cried at the altar at Trinity Baptist and whether that had been real or whether I had just wanted it to be real so badly that I had made it real in my mind. I decided that some of it had been real. I believed that. Even now, I believed that we had genuinely loved each other for portions of those 30 years. That did not make what he did less of a betrayal, but it made the grief make sense. You don't grieve something that was never real. The grief was the proof that something had existed, and now it was over. And I was still here. Here is what the next chapter looked like. In February, I repainted the bedroom. This might sound small. It is not small. I had been living in a bedroom decorated according to what Walter liked. Tape walls, heavy dark furniture, curtains that blocked the light because he didn't like waking up to sun in his face. I had spent 30 years sleeping in a room designed around his preferences. I painted it a deep, warm terracotta. I found new curtains, sheer white linen that let the morning light in. I moved the furniture and bought a reading chair for the corner by the window, the kind with wide arms and a soft cushion, the kind I had always wanted and had always talked myself out of because it seemed like an indulgence. I put a lamp beside it. I bought a plant, then another plant, then 6 more, because it turned out I had an instinct for plants that I had never had the time or the inclination to explore. In March, Carolyn and I went to Savannah for a long weekend. We stayed in a little inn on a cobblestone street, and we ate too much and drank good wine and sat on the balcony in the evenings and talked the way we had talked as girls, about everything and nothing and all the space in between. We talked about Mama Ruth. We talked about our own futures. We talked about what we wanted the next 20 years to look like. What do you want? Carolyn asked me on the last evening. You, specifically. What do you actually want? I thought about it for a long time. Long enough that the streetlights came on below us. I want to write, I said. It surprised me even as I said it. I had not planned to say that, but it came out clear and certain, the way true things do when they finally get room to breathe. I've been writing in my journals for 30 years. I've always wanted to do something more with it. Stories. Real stories. About women like us. Carolyn looked at me for a moment. So right, she said. In April, I enrolled in a writing workshop at the Community Arts Center 3 miles from my house. It met on Thursday evenings in a room with bad fluorescent lighting and mismatched chairs and 11 other people of varying ages and backgrounds who all wanted to do something with words. The instructor was a 40-year-old published novelist named Diane, who had the particular quality of someone who had made peace with her own voice and wanted to help other people find theirs. I was the oldest person in the room by 15 years. I did not care. I wrote about family. I wrote about women who had built things and lost things and rebuilt. I wrote about dignity and about love and about the specific, sustaining grief of discovering that someone you trusted was not who you thought. I wrote carefully and I wrote honestly, and at the end of the 3rd session, Diane pulled me aside and said, "Evelyn, you have a real voice. I mean that. This is something." Nobody had told me that I had a real voice since Mama Ruth. In May, Imani, Simone's daughter, my granddaughter, came to stay with me for a long weekend while Simone and her husband went to a conference. She was 8 years old, and she had a cloud of natural hair and an opinion about everything, and she liked to sit in my new reading chair and have me read to her, which I did every evening until she fell asleep. On the last morning, while I was making her pancakes, she looked up at me from the kitchen table and said, "Grandma Evie, are you sad?" I turned from the stove. "Why do you ask that, baby?" I said. "Because Mama said you had a hard time. But you don't look sad to me. You look like you." I looked at that little girl with her cloud of hair and her grandmother's eyes, and I felt something move in my chest. Not the grief this time, not the stone, but something lighter. Something that had been working its way up from some very deep place for a while now. "I am me," I said. "That's exactly right." She nodded seriously, as though this were a very logical conclusion. I turned back to the pancakes. In August, the divorce was finalized. Patricia called me the morning. The papers were signed and filed. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She just said, "It's done, Evelyn. You're free." I thanked her. I thanked her in the way you thank someone who has done something that cannot be fully compensated with money, even when you have paid them very well. She had gone to war for me. She had taken everything I had given her and turned it into armor and walked me through it. After we hung up, I went into the sunroom and sat in the good chair and looked out at the yard. The yard was mine. The house was mine. The bank accounts we had built were divided fairly, and mine were mine. The business I had helped build was represented in the settlement in a number that honored what I had contributed. The $87,000 of our money that Walter had used to furnish someone else's life had been recovered. Mama Ruth's $40,000, the money she had saved across 35 years, was acknowledged, in its way, in the final settlement. Not the same dollars. Not literally. But the sacrifice it represented had been seen and counted and accounted for. I would not let myself call that justice. Justice is a word that implies things can be made right and some things cannot be made right. But I would call it fair. I would call it honest. I would call it what Patricia had promised me that first morning in her marble-floored office, not less than what I was owed. In September, Marcus came down from Charlotte with the boys for Labor Day weekend, and we cooked on the back porch, and his sons ran circles in the yard, and Marcus sat beside me on the steps as the evening came down and said, "You look good, Mama. You look really good. I feel good," I said. He looked at me carefully. He has his father's eyes, which is something I have had to make a separate peace with, looking at my son and seeing his father's face. But the eyes hold different things. Marcus's eyes hold steadiness, hold something earned. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I know I've said it before. I just want to keep saying it." I bumped his shoulder with mine. "Don't make me cry on my own porch," I said. He laughed. And I almost did cry then. Not from sadness, from the fullness of it. From sitting on the steps of my own house on a September evening with my son beside me and my grandsons in the yard, in a year of the hardest living I had ever done behind me and whatever came next ahead of me. Open and unwritten and entirely, completely mine. I want to tell you one more thing before I close this story. In October, exactly 1 year after Walter sat down at that kitchen table, 1 year to the week, I sat down at my own kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad, and I wrote the first page of something. Not a journal entry. Something else. A story. About a woman who had built a life and watched it come apart and discovered, In the unbuilding, something she had never known was there. I didn't know what to call it yet. I didn't know where it would end. I just knew it was true in the way that the best stories are true. Not because the facts are real, but because the feeling is. I wrote for 3 hours that morning. When I stopped, the legal pad had 18 pages. I made more coffee. I sat in the terracotta room with the sheer curtains and the morning light coming through. I looked at the plant on the windowsill. A golden pothos, trailing green and chartreuse, climbing toward the light the way living things do. I thought about what Amani had said. You look like you. Yes, I thought. Finally. Yes. 30 years of marriage, one Tuesday evening, 6 hours of mediation, 42 pages from a forensic accountant, one call to my sister, one attorney with reading glasses on a chain. That is what it took. But here is what I want you to take with you when you leave this story. Evelyn May Tatum did not win because she was perfect. She was not perfect. She loved too much and trusted too completely and stayed in a place past the point when she should have let herself look more clearly. She is not a cautionary tale. She is just a woman. A real woman who did the best she knew how with what she had. What she won, what she reclaimed, was not just money, not just property. It was the record. The true record of what she had contributed and what she had built and what she had sacrificed and what that was worth. And beyond the record, beyond the legal settlement and the signed papers and the finalized date in August, what she reclaimed was herself. She had put herself down somewhere during those 30 years, had set herself on a shelf and tended to everyone else's needs and told herself that her turn was coming, that it would come, that eventually the building would be done and there would be time for Evelyn, for her voice and her writing and her terracotta walls and her plants climbing toward the window. That time came. It did not come the way she had imagined. It came through loss and grief and betrayal and legal filings and 6 hours at a conference table and one phone call to her sister at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. But it came. If someone has walked through your open door and tried to take the whole house, if someone has mistaken your steadiness for a resource to be extracted and your sacrifice for a weakness to be exploited, I want you to hear this story and know you are not done. Whatever they have taken, whatever they have tried to minimize, whatever they have filed or signed or moved out of your reach, you are not done. You have Mama Ruth's voice somewhere inside you, the one that says, stand up right now, stand up, call your sister, call your attorney, and then sit down at the table. Because the table, as it turns out, belongs to you.